So Q&A?
I'll ask a question.
Yes.
So it seemed that you were saying when you interact with people in the street, that you have this ownership about the space that you occupy when you're walking down the street, and you kind of like ignore people or don't want to interact with them, or at least that's what I got. But then you did want recognition from the woman in the elevator. So what is the difference between...
Good question.
What is the difference between wanting recognition from some people and not others? Is it different locations or...?
No, I don't think there's any difference. I think we want recognition from anyone. I think when we make a face-to-face encounter with someone, just mere eye contact, just an acknowledgement. This is why the nod of someone in the street can be sufficient. We don't need them to sort of talk about their family history and divulge their secrets. So we all want the recognition, and we all should have the affirmation, because we're human beings and we're corporeal figures, we're bodies with emotions. I think in the elevator, what I see, something in that moment, something about that woman's humanity spoke to me, and I was right. She was suffering, and I could sense that on the subconscious level. And I wanted a deeper affirmation than just a mere nod. Well, really what I wanted was just a nod, but she wouldn't even give that to me. So I don't think that we really want anything different. I think sometimes the moment demands more than just eye contact. That's why people cruise. Because they want more.
Right. Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about the... So in a way, you're saying that the knocking is always the right? So that's just...
I don't think the knocking is narcissistic, no.
No, but isn't that looking for something outside of you? So affirming that you're not just... that you're unique in a way because you're looking for something that is not you in a way.
But we're only human because we interact with other people. I mean, I think I agree with Aristotle here. That is, to conceive of someone outside of society, Aristotle, depending on the Greek translation that you work with, calls that person a social monstrosity. So we can only make sense of ourselves within, in his sense, the Greek polis. And in our sense, our communities, our societies. That is, we can't start from the view with nowhere. We have to start first within our families, and then within our cities, and then within our towns, and then maybe the nation, and then maybe the whole human race. But psychologically and existentially, it's just untenable to think that we can sort of, in abstraction, form these kinds of relationships without what I've called creative social intercourse. I think the manner, the methodology that we employ in order to participate in these enterprises is what might more describe the narcissism than the actual need to simply be acknowledged in your humanity by another person. Yeah.
I know you don't want to have a whole lecture on this, but can you give me the top 5 tips on how to identify a narcissist? I'll tell you why. I was married to one for 10 years, and I wished I'd known the top 5 tips 10 years before.
Okay, rule number 1. They're absolutely insatiable. They function like they're like a black hole. They will suck you incessantly of your resources, whether that's psychic, materially, anything at all. They're incapable of being satisfied. Second, they have a grandiose self that can only be fulfilled by you sanctioning the image that they put before them. So the narcissist presents an image of herself, and then she wants a counter image. She doesn't want your real response. She wants an affirmation of herself projected by the image. And if the image is not concomitant to the one that she's presented, all hell breaks loose. And I'll give you 3 because 5 might be too much and I want to get some other people in. But the third one is depression. Narcissists suffer from depression, and the reason they suffer from depression is because behind the grandiosity lies a self-esteem that is predicated on the achievement of things in the world. That's where they get their greatest sense of self from. And so behind the bloated, often very bloated, grandiose self lies a counter-deflated self that feels depressed the minute the book is published, the minute the accolades are descended upon one becomes depressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm not even a psychologist.
It seems to me, part of it is that there's a cultural epidemic of narcissism. That it's not just like particular individuals, but it's also something really created by culture.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, what kind of your view is for going beyond that narcissistic self? Because it seems like part of what you're talking about within relationship, with engagement,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this sense of not just wanting to promote one's own unique qualities, but really bring forward something that's universal. That was part of what I was saying.
Yeah.
But so in regards to, like, let's say people who really recognize their own narcissism, and then they say, well, I'd like to, you know, develop beyond that. What's kind of your view on that?
Well, I have a very controversial chapter in my first book called The Right to Forget Where You Came From. And I think a radical disengagement from culture, which is somewhat what makes my work a little contentious with other philosophers. Sometimes you have to radically break with people. Sometimes you have to break with your family. Sometimes you have to break with your culture, your race, your ethnicity. You have to inauthenticate yourself because you'd rather be an authentic human being than being an authentic black person, Jewish person, white person. So it takes the courage of convictions, and sometimes those convictions lead us into areas which lead to a radical break with the things that have formed the rottenness of who we are. Because another thing about the narcissist is that the narcissist is always asking for compassion. And I was talking to Kenzo about this today. Compassion very often in our culture is nothing more than an unreflected requirement or demand for us to engage in a rooted rottenness, a reward for bad behavior. So someone who's raped, someone who is a real victim, there are real victims in the world in refugee camps. Someone who, through no fault of his or her own, has suffered injustice, deserves our compassion. Someone who, through sloppy behavior, inefficient thinking, a desire not to think at all, not to evolve his or her consciousness, is bearing the consequences of his actions. Should that person gain our compassion? Most certainly not. Most certainly not.
That's a really good lead-in, because I was thinking about earlier when you talked about the vampires and how the people that are in our lives that are vampires, and sometimes it's hard to see that.
Mm-hmm.
So when we start to see that and we wake up to the people in our lives that aren't good for us, like, what is your internal process, or what do you put your focus on to make changes that are sometimes difficult?
I reach out to other people. I pick myself up and I go to Peru for 3 months and I work with, because I'm feeling depressed because people in my field are treating me a certain way, and I'm thinking, no, you have a Ph.D, you've written books, you tour around the world, you have a great life. Go do something for other people. So I go to Peru for 3 months and I work with disabled children and I do horse therapy. And I tell my kids the same thing. I said, you know, they come into my house and they said, well, one parent took away the car for the weekend and they're depressed. I said, you know, go work in a soup kitchen. Go read a novel about the caste system of India. Just do something outside of yourself. Invest yourself in the world with an assemblage of who you are. Infuse the world with the energy that is lying dormant inside of you. You don't have to go off to Peru or Africa. There are communities right here in your own neighborhood where you can do something. And when you see the appreciation, the gratitude, and the humility reflected back to you, if that doesn't present a change, that's a dead person walking. And I'm not sure, really. And sometimes I don't want to say that we have to give up on people. That's not my personal philosophy, to give up on people. But sometimes we do have to make strategic choices. And some of those strategic choices might involve deflecting energy from that person and putting it on another person who seems more willing to invest herself in the world.
I wanted to see if you could speak to this sort of MIDI space where one projects themselves, one is open to experience and open to other people and open to life in general, but also sheltering themselves from the vampire or the, energy sucker or the things that don't service, themselves, or, and how do you negotiate that space? How do you remain open, and how do you be genuine while also trying to deflect these ulterior motives of other people?
Well, I think in some sense you have to be willing to realize that you have a democratic, like I tell my students, you have a democratic right to fail.
Yep.
You have a democratic right to be hurt. I don't think it can be done without being hurt. I don't think the Buddhists are right in this respect. I always ask for the strength to recover from the suffering that inevitably I will face. But sometimes you have to suffer. Sometimes you have to be pained, and you learn from those experiences. But it's like just jumping into the thick of things sometimes without a prefab agenda or without a strategy. Sometimes a script is made up afterwards. It's a de facto script that is made up after the experience, post-experience, as opposed to somehow going in, like if I were to walk into this room and say, well, I'm only going to talk to the PhDs in here, or the educated people, and the artists, well, you know, those people are kind of, that would just be a pollution of the space, right? You sort of, you can't do that. You have to be willing to be rejected, to be abandoned, to be humiliated by other people. And feel that in the face of all of that, there still is something in you that can rise above it and still face humanity with a smile the next day. It's like in my class if 35 students are there and 2 students show up, I'm going to punish them, but I'm going to teach those 2 students as if I were talking to 100 people or 35 people. It doesn't diminish your commitment to being in the world. It can't, because that's just death.
Yeah, I agree. It's like the black heart of the bear. Yeah.
And there's one question in the back. He had his hand up for a long time.
So one of the writers of The Office said, if you don't know anyone like Michael Scott, you are Michael Scott. So my question is, how do you know if you're a narcissist?
I do have narcissistic tendencies. Are you? Oh, how?
I mean, like,
how do I know?
I'm not saying you.
Yeah.
I'm saying, how do we know if we're narcissists? Because
By taking
theoretically you wouldn't be able to see that you are, right?
No, I think if you're honest, if you bring a kind of mindfulness to your own behavior, and if you sort of take a self-inventory of, it takes absolute, look, just like how I don't know why Americans can be so committed to going to the gym 5 days a week and lifting weights, but they can't be committed to taking a self-inventory of their own psychic operations on a daily basis. And it's called getting a journal. I think if you really take this kind of introspective look and sort of have a dispassionate, almost third-person relationship to yourself sometimes, instead of thinking, these are my feelings, sometimes your feelings really don't matter. They just don't. They're not these axioms that have to be sort of unquestioned and accepted as if like handed down by Moses, you know, and thus spake Robert or thus spake whomever. So I think radical honesty. And the willingness to listen to people who care about you and who tell you who you really are. Sometimes it takes that sort of humility.
All right.
We are done.
That's everything.